Thank you, Molly, for the very kind words and introduction. Um, we're pretty excited about this topic, and if you haven't ever listened to the EduData podcast, this is a lot of what we tackle. We look at reports, break down how the reports were put together, and we'll talk about what's important, what the important outcomes are, and really how to interpret it. Because interpreting data is somewhat of a lost art in the world of captions and infographics, I believe. We will leave time at the end for questions, and we do have some interactive pieces of today's session. I was probably supposed to be on this slide when Molly introduced us, but there we are. This is a different shirt. It has been washed since that photo was taken.
You got two orange element shirts?
Am I not supposed to have two?
I don't have to. They
Yeah,
keep
we've
giving
got
me the alternate colors. I've been trying to get a second orange shirt for a long time now.
gotta have the second orange. It fades, man, over time. It's great.
It
All
does
right,
fade
so
a little
the
bit, yeah.
the agenda we're going to get into, why does this even matter? Things to look for in misleading data and common mistakes, why they're happening, and of course how to fix it. We don't want to give you a problem without at least some suggestions for solutions. So let's jump into why misleading data matters. And really, the kind of the beginning and end of that is that the data we're dealing with is not simple. We are asked to put out simple metrics. We're asked to put out holistic numbers of this represents my work. This represents our campus. We're looking for things to put on a great retention rate. Looks awesome on a brochure, but what does that really entail, and how does that really break down? In our work with Element 451, we work with our data and we try our best to show performance of recruiting campaigns or usage of our software through these metrics. But we're always quick to tell people when we talk to them that you have to dig into the meaning behind these things. There's so much complexity in even somebody starting and ending an application. Sometimes there can be so many different steps. Maybe they started 5 applications and they finished 3 of them, and you still have one person finishing an application, and maybe they graduate and make your institution look wonderful and give $1 billion, but that was still a 60% completion rate for that person. So are we really telling the right story? So it's important to understand what's behind the data so that when we talk about it, we're not misrepresenting what we actually mean. We are challenged with giving updates on our work, with providing updates to boards and to stakeholders at our campus. And there's a lot of pressure here. We understand that, but how complex these are is a big problem. And we make
Jamie, you said
decisions.
some. Oh, sorry.
Yep,
Could
go ahead.
we? Yeah, I was going to
Yeah.
say, could we talk about something at the top here that you alluded to, and I think we could spend a moment on is that there's an art to this, right? That this practice of digging through data and information, curating it for specific audiences, whether that's for marketing purposes or for internal and reporting purposes, or even for like government reporting purposes. There's standard reports that each institution that takes financial aid and goes through that process has to report back to the federal government. There's an art to the interpretation of that and the story that we tell from that data. And that's also where the fallacies come in, right? And that's, I think, what we're going to talk about a lot today. And you're going to jump into that example. But keep in mind, I think that art is a skill that you develop, right? And so I'm excited today to kind of talk through some of these examples, talk through some of the ones that we pulled together. And of course, if you have any examples as we talk through these of your work and stuff that you've encountered in your professional life, if any of this resonates with you, definitely let us know in the chat. I think today we also really want to interact with y'all. And Jamie, you're going to get that started in just a minute. So make sure in the webinar here, you've got the chat window open. And then there's that like blue button right above the message section that says make sure that's set to everyone, not just hosts and panelists or an individual. Make sure you've got that set to everyone so you can interact with us here as we start asking questions and asking for your feedback. So sorry to interrupt you there, Jamie. I just wanted to take a
No,
second and talk about the overarching theme here and the skill that we're honing.
Yeah, I'm just really excited about my riddle. I'm going to give them in a minute.
Yeah.
But you're not right. Yeah, storytelling is very much an art because you're having to balance accuracy, integrity, which is a big problem
Hmm.
sometimes in interpreting data, along with what people are looking for, making sure they know what they get. But we do use this data, like Timothy said, not just to present and say we look good. We use it hopefully to make decisions, to improve the processes for students, to improve internally so everybody can be more efficient and focus on the things that matter. In a study recently done by IBM, they said they believe that American businesses lose $3.1 trillion a year from acting on bad data. That's trillion with a T and an R, not million, not billion, just because of bad data. And I pulled together some examples here. Enron, maybe something you're familiar with. Uh, they inflated their investments and the return on investment. In some ways, it was a Ponzi scheme, but providing inaccurate data to potential investors. They got a lot of money in and they got in a lot of trouble, and a lot of people got broke for that. So they were providing inaccurate data to people that were going to invest. This was in several websites that I looked at for big data problems, and that was when we had lead in paint before unleaded gas. There were several studies done to see if this would hurt us, and the data was tracked poorly and wasn't presented accurately, and everybody got lead poisoning. Not a good time for anybody. So if you take away anything today, it's if you don't measure your data accurately, you will get lead poisoning. We should write that down.
That's the takeaway. Right, right, right. And
Yeah,
I think with that, we can wrap up the webinar for today.
we're
Thanks for
done.
coming, everybody.
Any questions?
You know,
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to talk a minute about Enron. I think that there's some interesting history in all of these examples that you listed, but I remember in my freshman year accounting class, the Enron case was the case study that we kind of focused on, because after that financial crisis, that kind of established the political will, the motivation, if you will, for the federal government to pass new laws related to accounting practices. Basically, that established the generally accepted accounting principles that all publicly traded companies have to follow for their public accounting. And that says, you have to structure your financial statements in this way, and you have to use a set of standardized metrics when you report financial information to the public. And one of the main problems with Enron is that they were kind of cooking the books, right? Is that they were structuring their financial statements in ways that were not holistically reflective of the finances of the company. And because they were a publicly traded company, that affected the entire economy. So a lot of interesting history there, and just one that I remember very vividly from a freshman year course. So props to my accounting teacher for like really taking the time to dig in to Enron and talk about that. I did not understand that as an 18-year-old, but some of it like stuck around in my head, and I still remember a lot of what we discussed today. So.
Yeah, that's great. That's it's great that it stuck with you for that long.
Right.
Um,
Like,
yeah, yeah. Kudos to that higher ed professional teaching you about that at
absolutely.
an early age. The next example, not as silly or fun because people lost their lives, but the Titan submarine that ended up imploding. Obviously, they did a full assessment of the technical pieces after, and they found that there were several data errors in calculating the pressure, the depth, all in a spreadsheet. So they're putting their lives on the line, this multi-million dollar project, and they're messing around in Excel, which is, I don't know, prone to human error. It's really easy to type a wrong number, type a wrong formula. That's also what happened to JP Morgan in 2012. This is a story out of England, so I didn't know a lot about this one. But very simply, they had somebody that was calculating risk for investments. And in a spreadsheet, they hit sum instead of average. They put that data out, and people lost $6 billion. So that person was very the individual that made the error is the title of the London Whale, which is a lot of fun. But yeah, it's a simple formula error in a spreadsheet lost $6 billion. So it's so easy to uh, get the data together and get it how you think you want to see it and then put it out. But if we're going to put it into action, we need to make sure that our data is saying what we want it to say.
Yeah, I mean that's if anything coming away from this slide, the importance of being diligent, being rigorous in our reporting practices, not just honing the art of reporting and the art of storytelling when it comes to data, but also, being rigorous in the way that we do our calculations and the way that we derive the metrics that we use that are important. Sometimes those, in our case, in our industry, that affects student outcomes. That affects their ability to attend college. That it affects their ability to retain, to graduate, to make their way into career pathways. So it's important. It's not they're not meaningless mistakes, if you will.
And I always find it in my career, I always was less, I was more hesitant to report good results without double checking than
Mhm.
I was bad results. Because it's much easier to go in a conversation and say, look, performance wasn't great this quarter. These are the issues. This is what we're going to do to fix it. Than to go in and say, look how great we did. And then the next week say, I hit the wrong button. Actually, it was pretty terrible. So
Mm.
it's much better to go in and be honest and say, the news isn't great. This is why. This is what we're looking to do to address it. Than trying to butter your data up and having to correct it later. That's yeah, that's I think a much better, a bigger risk for our success and then for progress for what we're trying to get better at.
Yeah. And I bet everybody listening probably has a similar story of their own ways that they have kind of encountered this problem in the wild. If you'd like to share that, please do. Just go ahead and drop a little message in the chat, and we can maybe circle back to that at the end and share some stories, share the wisdom, and all learn from each other.
Yep, appreciate that. You guys monitoring the chat, seeing people chime in from the schools they're at in the states. So please continue to do that. But now is what I've been waiting for since we scheduled this. It is riddle time. Now, you may have seen this riddle before. Maybe you know the answer. If you know the answer because you've seen it before, I encourage you to, I don't know, just chill for a few minutes, let people stew on it. If you haven't seen it before, please put what you think may be the answer or other questions you have in the chat. All right, let's go. So, here's our story. Three friends are hanging out at a bar, as you can see in the photo. The bill's $30. So they're like, hey, let's split it. They each give $10 to the bartender. Later, the manager comes by and realizes the bill was wrong. They should only have been charged $25. So he gives the bartender a $5 bill and says, give this back to them. Since the bartender can't divide a $5 bill three ways, he decides to keep it simple, gives each friend $1 back, keeps two as a tip. Now, going back to track the money, each friend got $1 back, which means they only paid $9, bringing their total to $27. The bartender kept $2, which when you add those together, you get 29. So if the guests originally gave $30, what happened to that last dollar? Each friend has $9, or each friend paid $9, and the bartender has two, and that's 29. How did we get to where did we lose $1 here? I've seen this presented again. Please chime in the chat, so I'm not just sitting here killing time. But um, I'll talk about the problems with this real earlier. But I think this reads like a lot of research studies or reports that we come across and do in this podcast of uh, sometimes it seems like people are trying too hard to defend their position, so they're just throwing numbers everywhere. Um, and in a lot of ways, when you see this many numbers, I mean, look at that last paragraph; it's almost all numbers. I start to get skeptical. Are there any guesses in the chat for where that dollar went? Timothy, you and I went over this the other day. Had you seen this before?
I'd heard it, but I'd not engaged with it very much. So this was fun. You taught me. You taught me this riddle. I assumed I was getting $1. That was
Yeah,
my thing. It was like, where did the remaining dollar go? It went to me for trying to
it
figure
went to
this out.
Timothy. All right, no dollar missing. I'm stumped. All right. Katrina's right. There is no dollar missing. And here's the issue
That's always good.
with this riddle. The entire premise of the riddle is asking the wrong question. The target number in the beginning is $30. After the money is returned to them, the new target number is 25. $25 was the bill. So if we start from there, they each paid $9, and that gets us to 27. 25 of those dollars are in the cash register because they paid it. The other $2 belong to the bartender because he essentially just stole it.
Hmm.
So we're really just trying to count $27 because that's all that they paid. They paid 27, they have three in their pockets. All the money is accounted for. But based on the misleading questions, the oversaturation of numbers in the riddle, and I'll go back to it, um, the all these numbers in here, it really convinces you that there's a problem that that doesn't exist. They're out here creating problems. And believe it or not, academic reports, academic publications can sometimes read this way. So this is an important lesson in how misleading data can be. If you were to be in this situation and you were at a restaurant or a bar, this would never occur to you, but it's presented in such a misleading way that it makes it look like there's a huge problem. So, just an example of how people can misguide you, and I don't know, just by asking the wrong questions, not even presenting any incorrect information, but asking about the outcome that you're not describing. Timothy, anything to add to that before you move on?
Yeah, by big problem, we're talking about one whole dollar, United States currency, presumably.
Yeah,
But no, that's a really good example. Yeah, it's that flawed premise where you start off on the I guess the wrong foot. You're not reading from the same page of the book of what you're trying to understand and solve. And that happens in much more complex ways when dealing like with stakeholders as you're reporting out, with dealing with the public as you try to ensure communication is really clear. Yeah, those manifest those same problems of not having the premise right, coming at it from the wrong direction, or just not understanding the scope of the problem, right?
right.
Those can all contribute to misunderstandings.
And I know you're going to go into examples of different types of misinterpreted or misleading data, but let's just back this up to something that we encounter all the time in talking to people who use element 451, and that's, let's say, changes in percentage over time. Let's say you had an application rate, you had two applications that were finished out of four. That's a 50% application rate. That may be good or bad, depending on your institution. But then the next week, let's say you have 400 complete out of 1,000. Yes, your percentage went down 10% and complete from 50 to 40. But if you're talking about 4 to 1,000, that's not even telling the right story. Or if it was 600 to 1,000, you could say it went up by 10%, but you said 400 incomplete applications. It's really not. Those two numbers aren't equitable, but if you just look at the change of percentages over time, it can be really misleading. So that's why we encourage people not to use those. We really try to limit showing that in our visuals in Element 451 because, and there are several reasons why that's a problem that Timothy will get to. But yeah, it's just so easy to say, look at this number, and it doesn't mean at all what you think it means. Let's get some of those problems. You ready?
Yeah, I'm so ready. Okay, so today we're going to kind of do some exercises here, and we're going to see some examples, and we'll see one example from each of these different misleading data types, right? So remember these as we tick through the subsequent slides. I'm going to show some sort of visual, maybe a quote or a chart of some kind, and in the chat, I want you to have a look at that and take a guess of which type of misleading data we're looking at or misleading data problem we're looking at. You know, let me see if I can actually, I'm looking at this now. I wonder if I can just copy some of this into the chat so when we tick away, you don't lose the list. I've got it up on my other monitor here.
This recording will also be available afterwards. Um, if in, but I think Timothy's trying to avoid you having
I
to
got it.
scroll through the whole thing just to paste this.
There
Wonderful.
we
Thank
go.
you, Timothy.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
All right.
Okay, here we go. Here's the first one. Okay, what we're seeing in this chart is demand for this History 101 course. And in the chart, we're seeing an increase term over term. We go fall 23, spring 24, summer 24, and so on, right? So we're seeing the total number of I guess requested enrollments for this specific course, right? So we might see this chart and go, okay, History 101 is growing. Maybe we need to open up another couple sections. We need to accommodate this demand. This is a very popular program now, something like that. But what we might miss by looking at aggregate demand is demand across modality. So if you could click here, Jamie, maybe. There we go. Here is the same chart split up by in person and online. And we see that in person demand is now pretty static term over term, right? Maybe we've got a pretty static enrollment or pretty static in person attendance for this program, but online it's growing. So that needs to clue us into some of the different things that might be happening on campus. Maybe we are advertising for online more. Maybe we have opened up some new online degree types that include this course as a prerequisite or something like that. There's lots of different reasons that the online modality could be developing. So we'd want to make sure that we're accounting for these different types of demand, different types of courses that we are experiencing. So based on the ones that you saw on the list there, anybody want to guess which misleading data type we are talking about in this particular chart? Give everybody a second to post if you want to. You might have already come up to the answer on your own.
I wish I'd paid more attention in looking back over these slides
I
because
got
they
you
are,
too, huh?
yeah, I
There's
mean,
there's a couple of different ways you
it
could
could be a
slice
few
it,
ones.
right? Yeah,
Yeah.
you could try to go. I would call this one, you can go ahead and advance. We'll go ahead and move on to the next one here. I'd call this one incomplete data.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's a problem of measurement, right? If we're only collecting enrollment and not collecting modality, right? That could be a problem that we can't solve without improving our measurement. But that's I'd call this the incomplete data example, right? So anyway, any thoughts on that one, J-Bo?
No, I think this is another pretty common piece. I mean, the variable here is delivery, but it
Mm-hmm.
could
Mm-hmm.
be student type. It could be recruitment territory. It could be so many other things that when you break it apart, the story is so much more rich and helpful than just
Mm-hmm.
looking at the aggregate data.
Yep. Absolutely. Sometimes the more dimensions that you can add to a particular line chart like this, the dimension being modality, delivery, student type, campus location, academic major, something like that. Yeah, the more trends you can uncover. So,
And really finding the right balance here between the number of dimensions and keeping a good
mhm,
sample size. Because if you broke this out in five different dimensions in campus location and online and hair color and shoe size, like your ends become really small, and that's not as helpful. So it is a, like you said earlier, it's an art, it's a balancing act to try to figure out how to get the most out of the data.
for sure. Okay. Here we are seeing enrollment across terms. Fall 23, fall 24, fall 25. We see a little bit of a dip there between 23 and 24. But there's another component to that chart that I think will clue you in on the misleading data type here. When we're dealing with data over time and comparing different time intervals, we have to be careful to not temporally mismatch. I jumped the gun a little bit on that one, didn't
No, all good.
I? So this is the definition of the temporal mismatch is comparing data across time without accounting for different collection points. So what we're seeing here is fall 23 is counting from August 15th, but fall 24 and fall 25 are counting from a later date in September. So we're maybe counting from the first day of class versus the census date. Especially important between, yeah, Day says, especially important on April 30th versus May 2nd. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep. So making sure that we're counting for the same thing because we might have had students that were enrolled on day one, but didn't make the census later in September. So we need to be sure that we're all counting from the same point. That point in time comparison, very important.
And even on a more minute level, if you're working across time zones can impact this a little bit,
We
which
could
we run
spend a
into quite a bit.
long, yeah,
Yeah.
the element, just some behind the scenes drama. The element captures just about every date as a timestamp. And when you do that, the standard practice is to capture everything in UTC, Universal Standard Time, Greenwich Mean Time. And the East Coast is 4 hours behind that, Central's five, and so on, right? So ensuring that dates are accurately reflected and not accidentally being rolled back from UTC to some other time zone and showing the day prior or the day ahead, depending on where you might be viewing the data. That's very important and sometimes a complex problem to solve.
It is harder than you would think it would be.
Yeah, and very challenging on the brain.
Yeah.
Uh, my wife likes to use the term timey-wimey.
Hmm.
Hit me
Okay.
with that before. I think
Yeah.
that's from a movie. Yeah. Okay. So here's a statement. 94% graduation rate among English majors.
Awesome job.
Awesome job. What potentially misleading data type are we dealing with right here? Vanity.
Ooh,
Saw a guess there.
4 year versus 6 year. So maybe even a little temporal
Mm-hmm.
issue.
Yep. I would call this one a selection bias problem because we've picked out a subset of our audience, of our total student body. We're only looking at English majors, and we note their exceptional graduation rate. And while that might be okay for marketing purposes, like if it's a program and you're saying like, hey, this is our English majors, program site on the website, and we have a 94% graduation rate, I think that's a perfectly acceptable use. But if we're reporting graduation rates or just trying to kind of cherry pick some favorable stats, specifically for decision makers and reporting to decision makers, this would need to come with a lot of caveats. We would need to, maybe couch this as a win, but not necessarily reflective of our entire graduation rate, if that makes sense. So that comes into the art of storytelling here, and just the sort of ethics and honesty of storytelling. We want to make sure that we disclose when we have picked out exceptional stats like this when we're doing decision making reporting, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Some questions that jump to mind here, if I see this at all, is 4 year versus 6 year, like they said, but also um, who are you counting as English majors? Are these individuals that are admitted to the English department their sophomore year, junior year? Are these people who came in interested in English? Like,
Hmm.
when does that begin? Because if you're not starting to count people till their junior year, then that's or till their third year, then
Yep. How do we account
that's
for
pretty
major
misleading.
changes?
Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Great point there too. Okay, let's go ahead and move to the next one here. Here we've got a chart of satisfaction ranking of students receiving a full ride scholarship. And we can see that the lion's share rated that they were highly satisfied with their I didn't go deeper into what exactly the question was in this example. That could be with, their experience at the university as a whole, the experience in their degree program, I'm not sure. But for the purposes of this example, it doesn't necessarily matter. We're still just seeing a lot of students reporting that they are highly satisfied.
I too, as a father of a couple kids that are going to start this process soon will be highly satisfied with some full ride scholarships. If anybody on the call wants to reach out, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I'm currently accepting full ride
Yeah,
scholarships for my children.
for my
Thank you.
kid, that'd be lovely.
That's like putting your Venmo in your Instagram
Yes.
bio.
Yeah, just send it here. You
Just
don't know me, you don't know the need I have, whether it's real or not.
but if you
I
if you just happen to want to pay for my kids' college education, you are more than welcome to do that. Thank
I
you.
could take so much misleading data to try to get that too. Like I have 4 kids. They're all going to go somewhere, not here when they're 18. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I think
This
Rebecca got it here. Well, sorry, I should say Rebecca's really close here. This is definitely similar to the selection bias, but I'm actually going to call this one the survivorship bias because that focuses on individuals who have passed a selection process, right? So there's some sort of trial or maybe a merit influence here, but they've been through some sort of process, and it ignores those that did not pass through the process, through the condition. And so these students received a full ride, right? So they've been through this sort of selection process of receiving that scholarship, and we have not considered the students who did not receive a full ride. So, of course, we're disclosing that in the description. Someone who is reading over this chart could come to the same conclusion there. But yeah, survivorship and selection bias there, both kind of different flavors in these examples, but very similar sort of problems and very
yeah,
similar sort of considerations from the perspective of the reporter.
I think there's some shared space in that Venn diagram between the two of those.
Yeah, yeah, there's definitely some overlap for sure.
I just like saying as many math words as I can while we're here. I mean, this isn't the EduArt podcast, right?
Venn diagram is an excellent buzzword to throw into the mix. Okay, here's another example. This is a statement, a reporting statement that says data shows students who attend tutoring sessions have higher GPAs. From this statement, we might want to say, well, look, we really ought to push students to tutoring sessions. And you're not going to catch me disagreeing with that. I think
Yeah,
tutoring
I mean,
services on campuses are very important. But we're doing something here that is potentially not as factually sound as it could be, I guess we could say. Another selection bias guess there. Yep, potentially. But in the spirit of seeing, yep, we're getting some folks come through the chat with the right answer here. In the spirit of showing one example per type, we'll look at this example is one we'll call misinterpreted correlations. We're basically
and
saying,
I was just going to say, yeah, we have a like 100% rate of guessing this one correctly, but we're not telling you that this is one of the last 2 or 3 and the list of remaining problems is really small. So
absolutely.
there's a little misleading for you too.
Yes, 100%. So a misleading correlation is when we mistakenly, perhaps mistakenly, perhaps not, say that A causes B, right? So tutoring session causes higher GPA. The other side of that coin is students who are highly motivated are likely going to have higher GPAs and are likely going to seek out tutoring services when they need it. So we might not want to say that so confidently or so definitively. Oh, Day shares another misinterpreted correlation. Students who visit our campus are much more likely to accept our offer.
Yeah.
You know what? Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, because
It's
we're
it.
basically saying, you want to take that one, Jamie? You want to talk,
I
talk
was
about
just going
that?
to say, yeah, it's just so interesting that we talk about this, and these are um, statistical biases, right? Like statistical issues, but inherently there are also psychological issues underneath when you're measuring that. Of This is a self-selection bias if you're looking at why people may be going to tutoring, but the statistical bias is misinterpreted calculation. Sure, if somebody never visits your campus, they're probably not as interested in coming as people that do. So it's I don't know, it's highly
Yeah.
likely. And maybe
Yeah.
it is a correlation, but I don't think and I think correlation and causation in reports are used interchangeably sometimes, which is not good.
And one of the things we've talked about so many times, Jamie, is statistical correlation, right? And
Hmm.
in that, that's a gradient, right? You can have
Hmm.
strong statistical correlation and you can have weak statistical correlation, right? And so, we might want to say that data showing that students who attend tutoring sessions have higher GPAs is loosely
Hmm.
correlated. So there's something to be said there. There's an insight in that, but we don't want to bet the farm on that necessarily. And the same with Dave's example there, because we could just as easily say students who are likely to accept our offer are going to visit campus,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. So there's additional factors at play that might be more strongly correlated to specific causalities.
So
That's a
I encourage you guys when you're in the middle of this, like this is to consider if you're receiving this data on ways to look at it, but also if you're presenting it. These are things that other people might call you out on. If you went with this data to say, data shows tutoring sessions are killing it, everybody has higher GPAs. If you run into somebody, they may say, well, and you need to be able to talk about that. You need to take those correlation p values with you when you're talking about statistical significance. If you're going to go and say these two are actually really highly correlated, and if you use the word causation, you better be ready to go with some numbers.
Yeah. So two takeaways: lead poisoning, p values.
Yep,
Okay.
both things.
All right. Here we got. I think we got a few more here. All right. Here's a little social media dashboard that's looking at Facebook ads. We've got a number of different metrics pulling that we're seeing here, and yeah, I'd love to know if the presence of the Facebook ad really is the giveaway for which one this is going to be.
Maybe triggering for some people
Yeah,
to look
certainly
at
for
this
me.
dashboard. Yeah,
Yeah, I'm quite upset right now.
yeah, I'm not very happy.
I was expecting Day to jump in on this one. I thought Day would be Johnny on the spot here. Okay.
I'm
Anytime
scrolling
we're
back up. I think this is our only one left.
Oh, sure. She
She
said
said,
given
give others a
we
chance.
got two more. This one and one more. Giving others a chance. Appreciate that. Okay. Yeah, anytime there's social media involved, my vanity metric radar is on high alert. And the vanity metric that I'd point to right here is this impressions number. Because I've seen many marketers show up to the marketing meeting and talking about, look at us, we got 93,000 impressions on this ad, and it's only been running for a couple days. Um, Organic posts have the same problem, views, and
Hmm.
sometimes people want to report impression metrics as like a brand exercise. A lot of people have seen our brand, so we're still getting our value worth. My experience says a little differently, especially when you're optimized on impressions. That's a good way to waste a lot of money. But we
Hmm.
can even see that there are some meaningful metrics here. I mean, we're seeing some dollar figures floating around. That's good to see. Click through rates and click percentages. Um, yeah, and there's Dave talking about what happened in January there. We had a huge spike in viewership, but that red line is our cost per. And our conversion line is down there too. And neither of them responded to that jump in impressions. If impressions mattered, you'd see our conversion rate jump too, but it didn't, right? And that there's a lot to unpack in that, and there's a whole nother webinar about how to lose money paying for social media ads. But impressions are definitely a vanity metric, and I think that they are like the punching bag in the marketing world of vanity metrics. So that's uh,
Yeah.
that's that's one that hits close to home for me.
Amen.
Okay,
Ugh.
here we go. Here we're seeing definitions. Oh, and I forgot to add my label. I apologize for that. We're seeing definitions for first generation. And that probably gives it away, especially since this is the last slide.
Yeah.
What we're seeing on this screen is inconsistent definitions. So in this scenario, maybe we want to provide a dimension to our data of how first generation students are performing, maybe across their GPAs, maybe in the number of tutoring sessions that they attend, in their demand for certain courses, tying that back to, other examples that we saw. But the problem here is that different offices around campus might operate with different definitions of the concept, right? So, and this one is also equally tricky because very rarely do you see offices write down their metric definitions.
Yep.
Most of the time, they just exist in people's heads or exist in the interpretation of the report that they make every year or they get every year. But the problem here that we're seeing is for admissions, a first generation student is a student that has that neither parent holds a bachelor's degree. So they could potentially hold an associate's degree. They could potentially have gone to college for multiple years and just never attained a degree. The scholarship office is looking for neither parent has ever attended college. So if we count those students, bringing it back to the Venn diagram, we might have some overlap, and students might match for both of those definitions, but in either direction, there's going to be students that don't. So,
Yeah.
okay, that I think concludes our
Yep.
examples and our talk through slides there.
Which I
Thanks,
mean,
everyone.
there's just so many ways to mess up the data. That's the takeaway from this section, I think,
Mhm.
of and a lot of these do overlap. So anytime you're looking at data or going to present data, look for these things to make sure you're you're above board and above reproach. Where if somebody tries to call you on one of these, that you're prepared to talk
You're
about it.
prepared to talk about it. And I think, you could even this would be an interesting exercise to do with ChatGPT. If you're
Mhm.
preparing a report or you're wanting to start some analysis on some data that you have related to your position, after you have maybe drawn some conclusions of your own, you could say, hey, here's a list of misleading data types, misleading data examples. Could you look through my reasoning here and see if you recognize any of them? And the benefit to that exercise, I think, is not only that you get ChatGPT or your preferred LLM's response to you, but you also have to go through the exercise of writing down your reasoning and your prompt, even just for the prompt, right? And so that exercise too of writing it down and seeing it kind of on your screen there typed out is also very beneficial. So
Yeah, I think a lot of times during that process, you'll start to recognize the pieces before you even get the feedback. Why are these things happening? I mean, if we said the word silos one time on our podcast, we said it 7 billion. Everybody has their own data system. I was talking to somebody yesterday from our local elementary and high school system, and he talked about moving to a new data warehouse. And when he said that, I was just like, everybody's using the same, like it was from a system wide standpoint. I was just so happy that they were using a consistent data warehouse for K through 12 in our area or whatever. But um, yeah, the maybe somebody uses Microsoft Access, somebody else uses all spreadsheets, somebody else uses a really nice data lake. It's hard to keep up with it when everybody's data is somewhere else and it is organized in a way that doesn't play well with yours. I know Timothy was going to talk about the first generation thing, but for definitions, I ran a TRIO program for a number of years, and you have to report first generation status of students to the federal government. So I would call, and one office would say, like you said, both neither went to college, neither got a degree, and then I call financial aid, and they're like, "Well, who do they live with?" And I'm like, "What are we doing? Like the government gave me this definition. Just help me out here." So it can be very complicated if financial aid is giving one stat and admissions is given another. There's a lot of pressure of us to say we're doing a good job. There's a lot of pressure of us to say we're improving, and that causes people, whether consciously or not, uh, to to make some of these errors that we're discussing today. And you like to think that it's always subconscious, but occasionally people will not show utmost integrity of presenting their data, and that happens quite a bit. And then This kind of goes back to the vanity metric piece, but don't just rely on tiles of statistics. Look at the meaning behind them. Look at the meaning behind the big numbers you have, so that you can defend it, explain it, and most importantly, act on it.
And I guess to finish up today, we'll talk about a couple of strategies that you can implement at your campus and talk through with your coworkers to try to avoid this stuff. Some of them personal strategies that you can adopt, stuff that you can implement at least with your team, if not throughout your institution. First one there, establishing standardized data and governance and definitions. I mean, when we talk about silos, this is the opposite of silos, right? I think we're of the opinion that campuses should try to centralize as much of their reporting, as much of their data as possible across admissions, across academics, across marketing to try to have a singular data source for all reporting purposes to prevent these problems. And that also, I think that brings more people to the table and that brings more observability, more collaboration, and I think ultimately better results. If you're the only one who has access to your data set and you're the only one who has access to your reporting metrics and the way that you're doing calculations, nobody else can chime in and say, "Hey, I noticed this. I noticed that, and I think that this could be improved. What do you think about doing this differently?" And so forth. So, I think that collaborative spirit, collaborative culture across data and governance is really important. Okay, yeah, we got another one here. Pair quantitative metrics with qualitative context. You want to talk about that one a little bit, Jamie?
Yeah, it's two sides of the same coin, right? When you're doing research, you think of these and they're often presented as completely separate from one another. Quantitative research, you're just looking at rating things on a scale, or you're looking at raw numbers. Qualitative is more about sometimes subjective, sometimes rating it not on a scale, but with rating it with your words and capturing key phrases and that kind of thing. Basically, the point of this bullet is to say be prepared with what the number means, what it represents, why, maybe how it got to be what it is, and be able to explain it.
Absolutely. And we've got three more there that we'll talk through in a second. But our next slide is going to be for questions, and we've got about 10 minutes left here before we hit the top of the hour. So if you've got any questions, yeah, please feel free to drop those in. We'd love to stay and chat a little bit more. And while those are coming in, I'll go ahead and talk through the rest of these. I already kind of
Yeah.
mentioned that third bullet point, right? Which is using AI tools to verify data or at least give you some pushback, right? Give you a sounding board. Of course, we know that LLMs like ChatGPT and Gemini or Microsoft Copilot, whatever you might have access to, can hallucinate answers. So you always got to be careful with that. You don't want to just copy and paste out of the prompt, but they can be incredible resources for reasoning and thinking and seeing your work through a different set of eyes. So definitely take advantage of those where appropriate. I think you put this one in here again, Jamie. It was this use cohort tracking and longitudinal views over statistic snapshots. I mean, there's a lot to say
Yeah.
on that one there too. And I mean, that might be a practice that institutional research is already a little bit familiar with. If you've got an institutional research department on your campus, cohort tracking is their bread and butter, right? They're putting people into cohorts and watching their graduation rate, their attrition rate over time. But was there anything else that you wanted to mention in that one?
Yeah, if you're doing these things and you're doing them well, you're going to avoid temporal mismatch. You're going to avoid selection bias in a lot of different ways. You're going to avoid survivorship bias. So basically, by looking at data longitudinally and by having consistent cohorts, you're going to eliminate the possibility of many of the issues we've talked about today.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, I think you also, just to circle back on preventing the issues themselves, those are things that I think over time you start to develop a knack for. You start to look for more consistently and patterns you start to recognize in the world around you. So, engaging with these problems and thinking through them and seeing examples and really builds that skill set. And then the last one that we can mention here is invest in data literacy for decision makers, right? Of course, we'd probably like to think that this is a great start for that. So if you've got other folks that are really interested in data and education, we hope to be a great resource for you there, and a free one as well. That you can come hang out with us every month and talk about higher ed data and solve data problems like this and just continue to develop those skill sets. We'd love to have you and anybody else from your campus that's interested in these topics. So keep
There are
us
a
in
lot of
mind
really
there,
good tools
but
out there.
there are, yes. You wanna share maybe one or two of your favorites there, Jamie?
No, I mean we're the main one. Just I'm sure there are
Absolutely,
others.
100%.
Just
Yeah, yeah.
assuming, no,
Right.
a great use of professional development that some people may see as not important, but ultimately it improves decision making, it improves integrity, it improves visibility, awareness. Like that's well worth it if your team if you want to get this for your team, I think it's you have a great argument to seek
Yeah.
that.
Cami has a question in the chat here. How can you ensure that the story being told with the data is conveyed correctly across departments? It is sometimes a game of telephone when departments try to retell the story. Yeah, that one might, be the case for looking like enrollment data across programs or something that might have wider distribution around the campus. That might not be as relevant for like marketing folks who are looking at specific, campaign performances and stuff like that. But in many cases, especially with admissions and enrollment, you are trying to address multiple audiences and groups of stakeholders around the campus. So yeah, I think that there's a lot to talk about in that particular one. One of the things that I would point you to is a concrete deliverable. Maybe that's a PDF or a slideshow where you can make clear the things that need to be made clear, and you can potentially circumvent misunderstandings, right? You can get ahead of those by, explaining the metrics you're using and adding a glossary. Of course, every time you create something and document something, there's also the chance that nobody reads it. And that is also a problem of adoption and engagement with the content that you create. But I think having something that's shareable and that people can dig into themselves and that gives them the level of detail that they need to not make wrong conclusions is a really powerful option there too. Doug chimed in the chat. He said, data accessibility and curation, Notebook LM. Now, if we've talked about silos 7,000 times, Doug has talked about Notebook LM 7,000 times, and I think Doug, you've certainly done some internal webinars, and you also had a presentation at the Engage Summit this fall. I don't remember if you mentioned Notebook LM specifically, but this is certainly a favorite for you, and I agree. I think Notebook LM is a really powerful tool. It basically lets you upload various documents to a single kind of chat interface, and that different users can come to that chat interface and ask questions about the documents. And those documents can include data reports, even data tables. And then using semantic matching, that LLM can parse through those documents and attempt to answer questions that users have. So that'd be another deliverable that you could potentially provide to your campus.
Yeah, Doug's the director of AI ops here at Element 451, and this is kind of his wheelhouse of using these tools to ensure that type of integrity and understanding with data. I want to go back to Cami's and say one more thing. In addition to trying to make your reporting um, misinterpretation proof, we also need to be good stewards of data on the receiving end. And if we receive data before retelling the story in a way we interpret it, ask the question. Say, look, I see this report you gave me. This is what I would like to say about it. Is that accurate? Does it match what you found? So be good stewards of the data and don't participate in the telephone game.
Yeah. How do we protect data when using AI tools? Is it just a matter of taking out identifying information? That's a great start. Yeah, absolutely. I would be very wary of providing, especially student data, to an AI system, especially a free AI system, one that has not put in legal assurances that they are not using data to train. Basically, data to train means that they would potentially save like any information you provide in a prompt as part of training data for a later model. because that would potentially capture that personally identifiable information. That said, AI companies, Google, OpenAI, offer tiers that to enterprises that do not save data, and that do not use prompts for training subsequent models. And for example, Element has its own large language model tools built into the platform, and we are on those tiers that are able to access the tool, but do not allow the data to be saved by the LLM's developer. So yeah, that's definitely a good point there to not include that identifying information. Any other thoughts on there, Jamie? Just apart from just kind of understanding what tools use and what the privacy policy is for those tools.
I think that's the main piece. Understand who you're giving the data to, who in theory, whether it's an AI service or humans, but also there are more and more programs like Element 451 where you already have your data in there. So when working with AI within our platform, you already know it's secure in there. So working on it within the platform is, I mean, you know it's secure, so you don't have to take those same precautions. So more
Absolutely.
and more tools are having that built in. So maybe there's a tool you already trust with your data. If you can keep it there and do it, that's best case scenario.
Yeah. If you're a Microsoft 365 company and you have Copilot as part of your Microsoft 365 plan, that privacy guarantee, as I think is what they refer to it as, is extended, or the same privacy policies. So definitely something to just be aware of. But when it comes to like aggregate reporting, like we saw some examples of like term over term performance and stuff like that, high level aggregated stuff. You do not. I don't think you need to be as concerned about LLMs having access to that information because they don't have the surrounding context that makes that information more interesting than just numbers.